Lovely. What a lovely introduction, Christy. Thank you. And thank you all for staying on and wanting to participate in a Time to Think experience. And I think I'm very sorry, Lucy, I didn't hear your I'm sure, very deep and interesting story. But it brings us even to a good place, maybe, of a moment for reflection and thinking further. So that's where we'll start from. I also would like everybody to have a chance to come in a way. So if you like, you know, it's a very great principle that this way of being that we really arrive in a group when we speak. And of course, we can't speak at any great length today. I would encourage you to be extremely succinct, but I'd love to come in to say your name, because the order you're here on my screen will be different on yours. So I will just say your name, and you might say your whole name with your surname and where you are. So it's just a few words. So if that's okay, you need to come off mute just to be able to do that. You could all come off mute in order.
Hi.
Now, have I greeted everybody, or has anybody missed out? Lovely. Well, welcome, and imagine us all in a beautiful space, maybe. Imagine us all sitting together around a table. Being with it, that's the thing about this virtual place, isn't it? We're sort of in our own places, and yet we're together virtually, which is very, very exciting to be able to do this and to be able to be with you from London this morning. Well, it's afternoon now, to tell you a little bit more about what do we mean about by the phrase even thinking for ourselves, and how well does the world encourage us to think for ourselves? It's a really interesting question, because I think the answer, sadly, is that the world doesn't really support us very much. There's so much urgency, there's so much doing, there's so much rush, there's so much, somebody said in a thing I was listening to earlier on, we should really be called human doings rather than human beings. So this is an invitation to be with yourself and your thoughts, and then in a little while to be with somebody else, to help them think and to hear their thoughts. The world we live in values greatly the people who are expert and who give advice and instruction and direction and correction, and all of us have a tendency to do it with our dear friends, with our families, and with our colleagues. And it makes me laugh, really, because what we're doing when we do that is suggesting that the thing I'm thinking at the moment is actually maybe better than the thing you're thinking. So here's my thought, and why don't you have my thought? And then you'll think like me. And it's a trick of the world, really, and everybody does it. So I think the invitation is to do something quite opposite. It's to get really interested in the fact that somebody's thinking, and not so tuned in maybe to the content, but being more fascinated by the idea that they could go a long way in their thinking, and they might find out something really new and different. And that's what the promise not to interrupt means. Promising not to interrupt, it does something different for the brain. If we know we're not going to be interrupted, we settle into a calmer, deeper place. The non-verbal, the emotional part of the brain, sometimes called the limbic system, goes into a very useful and powerful place of neutrality, which means that our brain cells can fire and wire without interruption, without being provoked by adrenaline and cortisol and all the things that can happen when people come rushing in, interrupt us fast, all the usual things that can happen, I'm afraid. The average length of time you might get to speak and think, because then, you know, when we're speaking, we're thinking, is about, I think, 10 or 11 seconds before somebody will interrupt you. That's really not very long. And so what we're looking to achieve is, you know, a far deeper kind of thinking and listening. So I always say that this work for me begins with listening, learning to listen really beautifully. learning to listen really, really well, giving attention in a way that says to the person that you're with, I am really interested in your thinking, therefore I maintain eye contact with you so you know I'm here, unless that's uncomfortable for you or for me, in which case we'll just gently sit back and be with each other. But if eye contact's possible, that's generally, I mean, look at babies. They always know, don't they, where the mother's eyes are. We do need eye contact. That's how we know somebody's with us, unless I say it's not something that's culturally available. So with that eye contact and attention that's keeping us thinking, we start to feel a certain degree of ease. And if we feel uneasy, it's maybe because our thinking's come to an end and we need another question, in which case, when you're in your pairs doing this in a moment, you might just say to the person who's thinking, well, what more do you think? Which is a beautiful question. What more do you think? Rather than coming in with what you think, because that's our promise. Doing this takes away urgency. Urgency actually destroys our thinking. Ease creates. It's like a little magic formula. So when we can introduce ease and when we can get rid of urgency, we are ready to think really, really well. It also offers us equality, because this way of being with each other is saying, your thinking is significant and so is mine. So much so that I'm going to have 5 minutes and you're going to have 5 minutes, and we're not going to interrupt each other. So it's unusual, really unusual. I wish it wasn't. I'm doing my bit to try and make it a bit more usual in different places, in London and wherever people ask me in. It can be hard. Of course it can be hard, because you know what? It's new. And new things are always a bit hard. Think of, I don't know, starting at the gym again, or learning a language, or any of the new skills you might have developed over the years. It's not a comfortable place to be, is it, when you start? So this might feel a little bit uncomfortable. If it does, that's fine. Just notice that. It's a new skill. You're flexing a new muscle, a new listening muscle. So attention and ease and equality are cornerstones of this way of being. There are 10 principles, and I don't want to sort of offer them to you like a shopping list, but another really important one is appreciation. We don't appreciate each other enough, do we? And we don't appreciate the world. And in the rush, we forget to stop and say, this thing is good. So when we're with each other as thinkers, what we do at the end is offer a tiny fragment of appreciation. Something you've noticed about the other person while they were thinking, while they were with you. So at the end of this pair that you're going to go into in a moment, you might just think, oh, I noticed she was funny, or I noticed she was kind, or I noticed warmth or loyalty or persistence, you know, something like that, something that's come emerging out of their thinking. So that would be beautiful. And all of this, you know, is related to your theme of creating balance, because the world is far too rushed. So how about if we were to find a little space every day for 10 minutes, 5 minutes for my own thinking, 5 minutes for somebody else's, in which we gave each other the gift of this quality of listening, so that for 5 minutes somebody else could think for themselves and maybe change their day as a result. So let me see how we are for timing. I think that's perfect. What I'd like to do is set up the thinking pairs and have them in a moment. Now, what I mean by the thinking pairs is the brilliance of Zoom means that we can be divided up into pairs and go into breakout rooms. You may have done this already, I don't know, earlier today. We can go into breakout rooms just to be one-to-one. Now, in a breakout room one-to-one, you are in a confidential place, and nothing you say there is going to be taken into the context of the big group. It's just your time. So what we'll do is set up with a lovely question that helps you think about some of the stuff you've done with these lovely workshops that Christy and Vina organize, SheSustains, which I think are just great, and to be with each other, to think about that, to think what have you noticed and what's going to have impact for you. We'll get to the question properly in a minute. So this is the little contract between you. Sit back in your breakout room. Know that you have 10 whole minutes for this. Decide which is going to listen and which is going to speak. That's the listener and the thinker, really, isn't it? So whoever's going to listen will ask the question. And the question, I think, needs to be something like, in the context of what you've heard and of creating balance, what do you want to think about? What do you think? What are your thoughts? In the context of the workshop and what you've heard and the theme of creating balance, what are your thoughts? That's a nice question. Can you remember that or scribble it down so that you can...
So I'm just going to write, what are your thoughts about creating balance?
Oh, lovely. Yeah, that's perfect.
I'm just going to write that in the chat so everyone can see it.
Perfect, Christy. So then sit back, be at ease. You're listening to inspire somebody else's thinking. You're not listening to correct them or come in with advice or do any of the busy things that we usually do when we're listening. You're going to have a completely different experience. You're simply listening to support that other person thinking. So if that person goes silent, it could be they're still thinking. There's real risk we come in just because somebody's silent. Lots of us are a bit introvert and we like to sit and think in silence. So let's not make the mistake of thinking silence means finished, because it doesn't often. It's just a pause. You know the way, if you run fast, you stop, you take a breath, and then you continue running. Well, it's a little bit like that. So we need to know that it could just be a pause and the thinker will start again. But if they don't, if she doesn't, then what you need to do is, what the thinker needs to do is say, I need another question, or I'm done, or something like that. And then the other question is, what more do you think? That's all it is. And that'll be perfect, I promise you, for 5 minutes. So if you're feeling a little uneasy about, oh my goodness, I won't have enough to say, I think you'll find you will. I don't think there'll be any problem. And if not, just ask for another question. 5 minutes will go by, and then Christy will need to drop in at 5 minutes, a note into all the rooms saying, 5 minutes, please turn around and, swap sides and refresh the question. The thinker becomes the listener becomes the thinker. Off you go again. And then after 5 minutes more, you have appreciation. Just a moment of appreciation, not a great long story of everything you ever heard that person say that was gorgeous, although that's very nice. I'm talking about something quite short. So that's a setup. And is everyone comfortable with that? Or is there anything anyone needs to say to get the best out of this? This is a really lovely experience you're going to have. Are we good? So having that experience of having 5 minutes each way, you maybe uniquely, maybe for the first time ever, I suspect first time ever for most people. So like first time experiences, it can be a mixture of things, and we don't have a huge amount of time, just a little. But I'd love if anyone had an observation to make. What did you notice about that was different? And maybe be very kind and keep it succinct. What's one thing that helps? What's one thing you noticed, either as a thinker or as a listener, that was different to usual? That would be great. Thank you. Wonderful. And I'm sure many people felt that same thing. Oh, so hard. Because normally we come in, but that's great, isn't it? To feel the difference. So what would anyone else like to say? What did you notice? What did you find surprising? Lovely. Thank you, Maureen. So time for somebody else. Surprised, delighted, shocked. Irena, thank you. Lovely. Pieces of listening, aren't they? So how we are in our faces actually matters. Whether welcoming or open or not, it matters. It's good to know. Anything else that somebody would like to say? Thank you. That's a wonderful point. Well, they're all wonderful points, but we don't sometimes really know what we're thinking ourselves until we hear ourselves say it. because we tend to go round and round in loops in our own brains. It's something, you know, this lovely phrase here behind me, attention is an act of creation. Imagine you give someone attention in this way that's so peaceful and yet somehow very stimulating that they create new thoughts or discover things they hadn't really understood before because they're articulating it to you. That's a great gift. So any other points before we start to think about finishing? Anything else? Anything surprising or difficult or interesting? And would you do this again? Would you think to say to a friend or somebody in your family, look, let's just do this thing. It's so simple. Let's just have 5 minutes or even 3 minutes each way. If somebody says, oh, 5's too much.
I just wanted to share something I noticed in our, with my pair during the time of listening. I sensed there was more to be said. With the first 3 minutes, it was more the thoughts or opinions coming out. And then at the third minute, there's something tremendous coming out.
Yes.
So it's very interesting how those thoughts then connect to feelings and expressing of feelings. So that's always powerful to notice.
Wonderful. Another fabulous observation, because actually if the session was for, half an hour, or like might be in a coaching thinking session, the full question is actually, what more do you think or feel or want to say? And of course, it's exactly to Vina's point that we push our feelings away because we don't have time for them. But when we can settle to think safely in the presence of somebody who isn't going to deflect us, interrupt us, then we can drop quite quickly into unexplored territory and discover where we are with our feelings, discover what's maybe the feeling that's maybe holding us back from something important. That's a big thing to find, to be able to express it safely, maybe even get emotional. And that's fine too, because that's actually smart behavior, and come out the other side feeling safer and more energetic, more balanced, to go into the theme of the day. So yeah, absolutely, Vina, brilliant, because that's what we do. We just drop into what's going on here really for me. And we don't allow ourselves that, just going through the day usually. So feelings, of course, are another component of this way of being, and expressing feelings safely dramatically improves our capacity to think well. So any other, I think we've got about 3 minutes, so it would have to be super quick. And otherwise, what I thought we might do is go round again to acknowledge this lovely group that's done this together. And maybe if I call a name, you might have a word, just a word. This is a really, succinct exercise. What's a word for today? For Lucy's and the experience of Lucy's story and this little workshop. Anything at all, just one word that touches on what you've experienced, and we'll collect the words. Christy and Vina might like to collect the words for today. So are you happy to do that? And just try and find one word, and I'm going to start at the top. Thank you.
Thank you, Ruth. Thank you.